Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, welcome to an extraordinary evening. We are gathered in this grand hall beneath a ceiling as lofty as the questions we pose tonight for a once-in-history encounter. Please join me in welcoming our two debaters, Karl Marx, the philosopher and revolutionary socialist whose ideas gave rise to movements and revolutions, and Milton Friedman, the Nobel laureate economist who championed free market capitalism. Both men have, for this night, transcended time to join us. They will debate the results and philosophies of their ideologies, reflecting on 2 centuries of economic thought and human struggle. The format will be as follows. Each thinker will give an opening statement. Then we will proceed through a series of structured questions on themes: utopia versus free market capitalism, state-controlled economies versus deregulated markets, the human cost of communism and late-stage capitalism, the moral responsibility of leadership, the commodification of intimacy and emotion, and modern inequality and generational despair. Toward the end, we will challenge them with hypothetical scenarios and thought experiments, including a case study of modern Japan's successes and struggles. Finally, we'll invite closing reflections. We will begin with opening statements. Herr Marx, you have the floor.
Thank you. I must admit, comrades and friends, it is astonishing to find myself here in what looks like a Sistine Chapel of modern times. I never expected to be granted an audience in such a place, least of all after my death. The frescoes above remind me that history weighs on us, but also that we dare to dream beyond the ceilings of the past. I stand before you tonight, humbled by the passage of time and the events that have unfolded since I first penned my critiques of capitalism. When I wrote in the 19th century, I observed a world in the throes of industrial revolution, a world where, as I famously noted, all that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, compelling humanity to face its real conditions. Capitalism was young then, brash and revolutionary, toppling feudal orders and creating immense wealth, but also immense suffering. I dedicated my life to understanding those tumultuous forces and to advocating for a world where the wealth we create is shared by all, not hoarded by a privileged few. Tonight I speak not only with the passion of a 19th century revolutionary, but with the sorrow and frustration of one who has witnessed what was done in my name. I know many say that the utopia I described led only to dystopias in the 20th century, that my ideas, when put into practice, brought about tyranny, gulags, famine. Let me be the first to admit, I feel an occasional pang of guilt, a profound sadness that regimes calling themselves Marxist betrayed the very emancipation I hoped for. They did it wrong. They turned my writings into dogma and, in some cases, into instruments of oppression. Millions suffered and died, and though I did not pull any trigger, I cannot fully escape the weight of that pain. Yet, I remain ideologically stubborn, if you will permit the phrase. I still fervently believe in the core of my philosophy, that human beings can transcend a system that treats labor as a commodity and people as mere means to profit. I envisaged a classless society not out of naive idealism, but from a scientific study of history's dialectic, the struggles between oppressor and oppressed. The heart of my vision was freedom from exploitation, a world where work is not drudgery, where our relationships are not perverted by money, where each person can develop their full potential. In such a society, we would inscribe on our banners, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." This was never meant to be a tyrant's slogan. It was meant as a guiding principle for a true democracy of the working people. So I will defend the utopian core of my belief to my last breath tonight. If anything, the decades I've watched from beyond have only reinforced my conviction that capitalism, left unchecked, produces great wealth and great misery. It develops technology and productive capacity wondrously, and yet too many are left asking, where is the prosperity for us? Why do a few enjoy unimaginable luxury while many toil for scraps? Why are even affluent societies haunted by despair, loneliness, and a feeling that life is reduced to a dollar sign? These questions are as urgent as ever. My opponent, Professor Friedman, is a man whose works I have studied with interest in my, shall we say, afterlife. We come from very different eras, yet I suspect tonight we will find the crux of the matter. Is there a possibility for a just and meaningful world beyond the one we have, or is the system of free markets the best we can do? I look forward to this debate, and to engaging with these ideas, old and new. Thank you.
Thank you, Herr Marx. And now, Mr. Friedman, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and if I may say, quite an honor to be here in dialogue with the legendary Karl Marx. When I was alive, I often sparred with Keynesians, debated fellow liberals and conservatives, but I never imagined I'd get to spar with Marx himself. As a man of evidence and reason, I'm not usually one for miracles, but I'll happily make an exception for tonight. I come here as an unapologetic champion of free market capitalism, a system I consider not perfect, but far better than any alternative tried so far. Over the course of the 20th century, humanity conducted many experiments with different economic systems, and the results, in my view, speak loudly. Where have ordinary people achieved the greatest measure of prosperity, freedom, and opportunity? Overwhelmingly, in societies that embraced markets, private enterprise, and voluntary exchange. As I have often remarked, the record of history is absolutely crystal clear that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities unleashed by the free enterprise system. When I say this, I do so grounded in empirical observation. In the past century, we saw dramatic contrasts: West and East Germany, South Korea and North Korea, market economies like the United States, and command economies like the Soviet Union. Time and again, those with free markets outperform those with state control. That is not to ignore the very real flaws and challenges in capitalist societies. And I assure you, we will discuss those. But it is to highlight a fundamental point. Intentions aren't enough. As I've said, one of the great mistakes is to judge policies by their intentions rather than their results. I believe capitalism, by aligning incentives, by harnessing human creativity, and even our foibles like self-interest, produces results far superior to the top-down attempts to reshape society that we saw fail, often tragically, in the 20th century. Professor Marx spoke of the utopian core of his vision. I respect the moral passion. Who wouldn't want a world without exploitation? But I am deeply skeptical of utopias. In pursuit of heaven, we have created hell on earth. Meanwhile, the much more prosaic system of free market capitalism, which makes no claim of perfection, has quietly made life better for billions. It has its own kind of idealism, not the idealism of a perfect plan, but the idealism of freedom. The belief that if you let individuals make their own choices and trust them with liberty, they will not create a perfect world, but they will create a better world than any central authority could design. As I famously argued, a society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. Now, I am not here to suggest capitalism has been an unequivocal triumph, without dark sides. I too have seen things since my passing, the 2008 financial crisis, for instance. The Milton Friedman standing before you is confident, but not infallible. I remain a student of evidence. If there are darker consequences of unchecked markets, we must address them. The goal, after all, is human flourishing. In that, Professor Marx and I share a common aim, even if we disagree almost entirely on how to achieve it. I look forward to a lively, intellectually sharp exchange, with perhaps a flash of wit here and there. In the spirit of truth-seeking, we owe it to this incredible audience and to history to be honest, about successes, about failures, and about the ideas that can carry us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Now, let us proceed to the first theme of our debate. The first topic is utopia versus free market capitalism. This goes to the heart of your philosophies. Dr. Marx, you envisioned a form of society often described as a utopia, a classless society where all people are equal and free from exploitation. Mr. Friedman, you have championed what some call the capitalist ideal, which is not about a promised utopia, but about letting the market create the best possible outcomes through individual freedom. My question to both of you, is the idea of a utopia fundamentally at odds with free market capitalism? And what would you say to those who claim capitalism itself has a sort of utopian promise, that free markets will solve all problems?
The idea of utopia has always been a double-edged sword for those of us who sought a better society. On the one hand, it inspires, it keeps alive the dream that tomorrow can be better than today, that we need not accept the injustices around us as eternal. On the other hand, utopian can be used as a dismissive label, an impractical fantasy. Now, I never wrote a blueprint for perfect society, as some utopian socialists of my era did. I was quite critical of the so-called utopian socialists who preceded me, who thought ideal communities could simply be decreed into existence. My approach was more scientific. I analyzed capitalism's laws of motion, the class struggle, and concluded that the working class would eventually create a new society. But it's true, I did hold up a vision, a higher phase of society beyond capitalism. In that sense, yes, call it utopian if you like. I called it communism, a society where the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all, where the prehistory of human society, with its oppressors and oppressed, has given way to a truly humane society. Is that at odds with free market capitalism? Absolutely. They are not just at odds, they are antithetical. Free market capitalism at its core relies on competition, on individual profit motive, on inequality to some degree. The very dynamic that one succeeds while another fails, one accumulates while another is dispossessed. My vision of communism is precisely to overcome that cutthroat dynamic, to replace the anarchy of the market with rational planning in the interest of the many, and to replace the focus on profit with a focus on human need and creative fulfillment. I see capitalism's ideal as a self-regulating market delivering efficiency, and I see communism's ideal as a cooperative commonwealth delivering justice and equality. These are two very different ideals. Mr. Friedman might say capitalism doesn't promise a utopia, only the best we can do in an imperfect world. But I'd argue capitalism does have a sort of utopian myth attached to it, what we might call the free market utopia. It's the idea that if you just let markets run unhindered, we'll get something close to paradise. Innovation will flourish, everyone who works hard will prosper, democracy will be bolstered by economic freedom, and society will harmoniously balance itself out through the invisible hand. This is a beautiful story, but it is indeed a myth. It ignores how markets produce monopolies, crises, and inequalities of power that undermine the very freedom capitalism promises. In a capitalist society, a wealthy few often hold vastly more power, not just economic, but political and cultural than the rest. How is that a free society for the majority? The market's freedom can become the worker's constraint. The worker is free to choose a job, yes, but must sell his labor or starve. So the freedom of the market can mean the unfreedom of the individual who lacks property. This is why I once wrote that under capitalism, workers are doubly free. Free to sell their labor and free of any other means to live. A bitter irony. To me, true freedom requires abolishing that condition. It may sound utopian, but I maintain that we should strive for it. We have seen enough of what one might call late-stage capitalism now, huge productive capacity alongside glaring social ills, to know that simply letting markets be free doesn't solve all human problems. People feel something is missing. They yearn for community, for equality, for something nobler than just being cogs in a profit machine. That yearning is the utopian impulse, and I do not think it's foolish. I think it's profoundly human. The question is how to channel it without causing disaster. So yes, utopia versus free market capitalism is not merely an abstract choice. It might be framed as hope versus realism. I am not naive about human nature, but I refuse to accept that we as humans can't transcend a system we ourselves created. I believe we should dare to dream of a qualitatively better world. Without that dream, we stagnate. With that dream, we at least have a star to guide us.
Milton Friedman, your response. Is capitalism a pragmatic acceptance of human imperfection in contrast to utopian dreams, or does it carry its own kind of idealism?
Listening to Professor Marx, I'm struck by how compelling his vision is on an emotional level. Who wouldn't want the things he describes? True freedom, community, and end to exploitation. These are universal aspirations. Where we differ is in our assessment of how to achieve them, and indeed, whether attempting to directly engineer them does more harm than good. I come from a tradition that doesn't promise a perfect world. Capitalism acknowledges from the start that human beings are fallible, sometimes greedy, sometimes generous, and that any economic system has to contend with those realities. The beauty of the free market system is that it channels those very human traits into productive outcomes. People pursuing their self-interest end up, via an invisible hand, promoting the general interest, as Adam Smith noted long before either of us. It's not that markets make people angels, it's that markets take people as they are and encourage cooperation through exchange. Marx suggests that capitalism carries a utopian myth. If we let markets run free, everything will be wonderful. I have never claimed markets solve every problem. They're a mechanism, not a messiah. They excel at efficient allocation of resources, innovation, and creating wealth. They do not, by themselves, ensure that every moral value or social cohesion is maximized. Those depend on culture, institutions, and choices people make in the political and personal spheres. I certainly don't think the market will automatically provide for the poor or protect the environment. Those are areas where I have argued for certain government actions or social arrangements to complement the market. But let's examine the attempts to replace markets. They promised an end to poverty, an end to inequality, a new era of brotherhood. What did we see in the Soviet Union, Mao's China, Cambodia? Not a withering away of the state, but a vast expansion of it. Marx argues that wasn't true communism, but those regimes thought they were applying Marxism. The issue is that capitalism doesn't require people to be angels to work. Socialism seemingly does. By contrast, capitalism says, let everyone seek their own betterment, and we'll figure out rules so that in seeking their own good, they also advance everyone's. That's a more realistic, if less romantic, view of human nature. Marx says the freedom of the market can mean unfreedom for those without property. That's valid. But does any other system make them more free? In centrally planned systems, do the workers feel less like cogs or more so? Do they have the freedom to move jobs, speak their mind? The record suggests no. So yes, capitalism doesn't eliminate all asymmetries, but it offers multiple centers of power. You can leave your employer, start your own firm, or find another job. In a centrally planned system, power is concentrated in one institution, the state. I'm not against dreaming of a better world. I favor what I'd call incremental utopias, piecewise improvements tested in practice. Free markets coupled with democratic institutions allowed for experiments and reforms. Over time, we mitigated child labor, improved worker safety, etc. These incremental changes produced something that earlier generations might have called utopian. Compare the life of a modern worker to a serf or a 19th century factory worker. By any measure, material well-being, education, political rights, it's vastly improved. Not perfect, but improved. And that happened largely via evolution, not violent revolution. Marx used the phrase late-stage capitalism, implying we're at the final act. But I've heard that phrase since I was young, yet capitalism is still here, adapting. Perhaps we just need to keep working to improve. A free market system with checks can be flexible and humane, more humane, I'd argue, than trying to impose equality. In short, utopia, if ever achievable, won't be delivered by suppressing markets and freedom. It might be approached by leveraging the creativity of free societies and staying true to moral values.
A quick follow-up for both of you, since we're on this foundational issue. Dr. Marx, Mr. Friedman just argued that your vision requires people or leaders to be better than they are, whereas capitalism works with human flaws. How do you respond to the charge that communism is impractical because it assumes an unrealistic level of virtue or solidarity? And Mr. Friedman, do you acknowledge any element of idealism in capitalism?
The claim that my vision requires angelic humans is a common refrain. I would counter that no system can function if everyone is utterly selfish. Capitalism needs social norms and laws curbing the worst behavior. That's a moral baseline. Under communism, it's not that we need saints. We need structures that encourage our better natures. Capitalism often brings out greed. A socialist society, if achieved democratically, would be the school of a new sociality. People would learn to cooperate because it benefits everyone. It's not about human angels, but about removing systemic incentives for vice.
Capitalism doesn't assume people are devils, it assumes they're motivated partly by self-interest. The idealism in capitalism is the idea that voluntary exchanges can improve both parties. It's not utopian, but it's optimistic, that by trading, we can all gain. Of course, that requires basic ethics and law. Markets don't excuse fraud or coercion, but we don't rely on everyone being an altruist. The structure channels mixed human motives into often positive outcome.
Moving on to our next theme, state-controlled economies versus deregulated markets. Dr. Marx, your critique of capitalism led to the idea of a planned economy where the state or the community as a whole would control production. Mr. Friedman, you argued for minimal state intervention, letting markets decide. We've seen historical attempts at both ends. Did state-controlled economies fail because central planning is inherently inefficient, or was it just done poorly? Did deregulated markets lead to prosperity for all, or just some? Mr. Friedman, you may start.
I want to clarify, I never advocated literally zero government. Government has crucial functions: defense, enforcing contracts, protecting against fraud. But I opposed government's expansion into controlling or heavily regulating economic outcomes. Historically, attempts at command economies, like the Soviet Union, were disastrous. They abolished price signals, leading to chronic shortages or surpluses. Innovation languished because there was no incentive to improve. Eventually, these systems collapsed. Deregulated markets, on the other hand, often spurred innovation and competition. Look at airline deregulation in the US. It made air travel more affordable, or the contrast between West and East Germany, or South and North Korea. Nations with freer markets consistently outperformed command economies. Now, transitions can be messy, like Russia in the 1990s, but that was less about markets and more about corruption and lack of legal frameworks. So overall, I maintain that the state should be a referee, not a player, creating a rule of law but letting markets operate.
Dr. Marx, your reply?
Yes, the Soviet command economy had serious flaws. I won't deny it, but I didn't design that system. Lenin and Stalin took my ideas in directions I never specified. Also, we shouldn't measure only by GDP growth. Did the Soviet model for a time eliminate extreme poverty or rapidly industrialize? Yes, it did some things that capitalism neglected, and we see modern capitalist societies that still have public ownership in key areas or heavy intervention, and they function quite well. Think of the Nordic countries. Markets can be useful, but I believe some core industries and social services should be collectively owned or strongly regulated. Health, education, utilities. Pure deregulation can lead to crises like financial collapses, monopolies, or severe inequality. A balanced view might say we don't want total command economy, but nor do we want everything left to private profit. In essence, I argue for democratic control of the economy. Past attempts at planning often failed due to authoritarianism, but that doesn't condemn all forms of public or cooperative ownership. We must learn from history and incorporate freedoms, local feedback mechanisms, and possibly partial market signals under a socialist framework.
The next theme, the human cost of communism and late-stage capitalism. Dr. Marx, communism in practice led to horrors, mass starvations, gulags, millions dead. How do you justify your ideology given that? Mr. Friedman, critics say capitalism has its own human cost. Exploitation, sweatshops, colonialism, and even modern deaths of despair. How do you respond to the charge that capitalism also has blood on its hands?
I feel guilt and sorrow for what was done in my name under Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot. It contradicts the very liberation I wanted. They turned my writings into dogma and inflicted atrocities. But I also note capitalism's historical atrocities: slavery, colonial famines, sweatshops, modern poverty. These are enormous human costs too, if we're honest. Capitalism often normalizes such suffering as indirect or just the market, but real lives are ruined, so both systems have inflicted pain. Let us learn from both. I do not defend the tyrannies under red flags, but neither should we pretend capitalism is clean. In the end, we must judge by human outcomes above all. Communism's failure was partly that the state became totalitarian. Capitalism's failure is the more hidden misery and inequality it perpetuates. Neither can stand uncriticized.
I appreciate Marx's condemnation of Stalin's purges, and yes, capitalism has had moral failings. But I'd argue that many of those failings, slavery, colonialism, were not pure free market. They involved force and state collusion. Slavery is the opposite of voluntary exchange. Still, I acknowledge the sweatshop issue or environmental damage. My stance is that we should address such harms within a market framework. We pass laws, set rules, hold businesses accountable. That's easier to do in a capitalist democracy that allows dissent than in a one-party state. I don't deny capitalism can have externalities or inequalities, but it also has feedback mechanisms for correction. You can organize, protest, legislate. That's how child labor ended, how pollution laws were passed. Whereas communist dictators often crushed dissent. So yes, there's a human cost on both sides, but I see capitalism as more reformable.
Next, the moral responsibility of leadership. In communism, the state wields enormous power. In capitalism, corporate and political leaders also hold great sway. How do we ensure leaders don't become a new oppressor class? Dr. Marx, how would your ideal system avoid the dictatorship problem? Mr. Friedman, do corporate and wealthy elites have moral obligations beyond profit?
Leadership should be accountable to the people. In my vision, the state was to wither away, replaced by bottom-up democracy. Unfortunately, Lenin and Stalin created a party hierarchy that betrayed this. To avoid that, we need real democratic checks, free speech, multi-party elections, no personality cults. And yes, under capitalism, corporate leaders have huge power without direct democratic accountability, controlling resources and lobbying politicians. They too must be restrained. Money shouldn't buy power. Leaders must remember they serve the people.
I famously wrote that the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits within legal and ethical rules. I never said they should break laws or be immoral. But if we want businesses to behave differently, we change the rules, impose regulations, taxes, etc. That's the role of democratic governance. On the moral side, business leaders are still people. They can act ethically, but we shouldn't rely solely on that. Politicians in a capitalist democracy must protect the public interest by setting boundaries. Both systems hinge on checks and balances. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Whether it's a party state or a corporate monopoly, we must keep power diffused.
Our next theme, the commoditization of intimacy and emotion. Modern capitalism monetizes personal relationships, attention, even affection. We see dating apps turning love into a market, rent-a-friend services, emotional labor for sale. Dr. Marx, this seems to echo your notion of alienation and commodity fetishism. Mr. Friedman, is it necessarily bad or just meeting needs via markets?
Under capitalism, everything can become a commodity. It's the universal pimp. Love, friendship, creativity, all reduced to transactions. That is alienating. People yearn for real connection but find it monetized. It's tragic. This is late-stage capitalism seeking profit in every corner of human life. Under communism, these relationships wouldn't be under pressure of money. If we removed economic compulsion, people could engage in genuine intimacy. This commodification of intimacy is a symptom of a system that perverts fundamental human bonds.
I do find the spread of market logic into all aspects of life concerning, but it's not entirely forced on people. Some choose to pay for therapy or rent companionship if they have no other options. I'd rather address the loneliness and social breakdown at its root. But I wouldn't ban these services outright. We do need spaces free of market pressures, family, friendships, community organizations. Capitalism doesn't forbid that, it just offers optional transactions. My hope is that a healthy culture will preserve genuine connection voluntarily rather than forcibly stopping markets in certain areas.
Our final structured theme, modern inequality and generational despair. The gap between rich and poor has grown. Many young people feel locked out of stable futures, turning them towards socialism again. Dr. Marx, do you see this as validation of your analysis? Mr. Friedman, how do we fix this within capitalism?
It's clearly a validation of the tendency of capitalism to concentrate wealth unless counteracted. Young people see billionaires flying to space while they can't afford rent. That breeds despair. If reforms don't happen, revolution becomes thinkable. I hope it's peaceful, but the pressure is there. To fix it, tax the rich, invest in public goods, empower workers, shift toward collective ownership. Otherwise, the system's legitimacy erodes.
I acknowledge inequality has surged. Some of it's due to globalization, technology, and policy choices. We can address it through better education, a stronger safety net. I've long proposed a negative income tax, and ensuring competition, break up monopolies if needed, make housing more affordable by removing restrictive zoning. A balanced approach can maintain growth while reducing despair. We don't need to scrap capitalism, we need to refine it.
Now, a brief hypothetical about Japan as a case study. Japan rose under capitalism, became wealthy, then stagnated with deflation, overwork, social isolation, low birth rates. Some see it as proof that even capitalist success can lead to spiritual malaise. Dr. Marx, what do you say? Mr. Friedman, your take?
Japan's economic miracle demanded total devotion to work, leading to burnout and an alienated younger generation. Material success didn't bring happiness. It's a sign that capitalism's promises can ring hollow once the growth slows. Japan could use its wealth for shorter work hours, universal basic security, more communal life, a step toward a socialist ethos that values well-being over endless production.
Japan's issues stem partly from policy and cultural rigidity, lifetime employment, limited immigration, hierarchical corporate norms. A freer, more open environment could encourage entrepreneurship, work-life balance, and adapt to demographic challenges. I see it not as a failure of capitalism, but of insufficient flexibility. They should liberalize further and use market innovation, including robotics, to address labor needs. Material wealth alone doesn't ensure happiness, but that's not purely capitalism's responsibility. Society must foster purpose and community.
Final hypothetical. If you could redesign your ideology with hindsight, what would you change?
I'd emphasize democratic socialism, multi-party freedoms, and explicit safeguards against authoritarianism. I'd allow some market mechanisms in a transitional socialism, encouraging cooperatives. No cult of personality, no one-party rule. Incorporate insights from ecology, feminism, and learn from mistakes. Keep the core goal, ending exploitation and alienation, but protect civil liberties fiercely. Achieve change gradually if possible. Revolution only if absolutely necessary, and then swiftly restore full democracy.
I'd update free market theory to tackle 21st century issues. I'd strongly support a carbon tax to address climate externalities. I'd favor stricter rules on finance to prevent crises. I'd promote a negative income tax or basic income to ensure a social floor. And I'd endorse vigorous antitrust action against tech monopolies. My guiding principle remains freedom and minimal bureaucracy, but we must correct market failures and preserve public trust in capitalism. A flexible, humane market system is the goal.
Closing statements. Dr. Marx.
This dialogue with Mr. Friedman has been extraordinary. If there's one thing I hope you take away, it's that we need not accept the status quo as the end of history. We can imagine a society that uplifts everyone, free from exploitation. I've learned how crucial democracy and civil liberties are in the struggle for a better future. Yet I remain convinced that capitalism, left unchecked, generates inequality, alienation, and crises. I call on you to dream of and work toward a world in which the economy serves human beings, not the other way around. Let us learn from past failures, but not abandon the hope that humanity can create a more just and humane society.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. I remain a proponent of free markets. Not because they're perfect, but because historically they've delivered prosperity and freedom better than any alternative. That said, I recognize we must address flaws like inequality and externalities with prudent rules and a social safety net. My final word is about balance. Preserve economic freedom, but use our democratic institutions to steer it toward the common good. Let our guiding star be human happiness. When the market alone doesn't get us there, we refine it. I believe deeply in freedom's capacity to unleash both creativity and compassion, provided we remember our shared responsibility. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you both. That concludes our extraordinary debate. May these ideas continue to spark dialogue and guide us as we grapple with the future. Good night, everyone.